Hello, welcome to Citizens for Global Solutions Minnesota. This is the Human Rights Forum. I'm Katia. Citizens for Global Solutions Minnesota is a nonprofit organization based in the state of Minnesota in the United States. Every third Thursday of every month, we host a global movies discussion. Tonight, exceptionally, we are hosting our also Human Rights Forum, where we will discuss the situation in the Philippines. If you want to learn more about CGS Minnesota work, please visit our website at www.globalsolutionsmn.org and follow us on Twitter and Facebook pages. On Facebook, we are Global Solutions MN, and on Twitter, we are CGS_MN. And YouTube, CGSMN. Ladies and gentlemen, to speak with us tonight, we invited and are honored to host our guest speaker, Gary King. Gary King received a BS degree in physics and an MS degree in nuclear physics and a PhD degree in neurophysiology from the University of Minnesota. After postdoc research in autonomic and pain neural systems, he worked on urology prostheses for 9 years with the Twin Cities company, AMS. Joining Medtronic Neuromodulations in 1989, he rose to be a senior principal scientist designing and managing applied clinical studies of spinal cord stimulation and peripheral stimulation for chronic back and limb pain, chronic daily headaches, angina, and peripheral vascular disease. In the past, he has also worked on deep brain stimulation for pain and tremor. He has 77 patents and a dozen medical research articles. He became interested in human rights at first through Vietnam War. Between campus protests and confronting the draft, he became a conscientious objector and performed 2 years of alternate service. Due to marriage, he visited the Philippine island over 30 times since 1975. He met 12 human rights leaders who were later murdered by the government agents. He worked with a group, a task force detainees of the Philippines, sponsored by the Catholic Church, which visits and helps political detainees, and also a successor group, Karapatan. Over the years, Amnesty International Group 37 has worked on behalf of more than 40 prisoners of conscience in the Philippines and has seen all of them released. He visits political prisoners in jail each time he goes. He also has a program that helps their children stay in school called the Philippines in Scholars. And of course, he is the member of Amnesty International Group 37. Out of work with Filipino prisoners, he started the efforts to keep the children of the disappeared and political prisoners in schools in 1994. It grew so large that in 2001, it became incorporated as a 501c3 tax deductible charity. Philippines Scholars that today helps needy students stay in accredited schools in 10 sites. About 14 per year are graduating from college, and he is still president of that organization, which delivers over $95,000 per year in scholarships. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to introduce my friend Gary King. Gary.
Thank you, Katia. Thank you. Okay, well, I think most of that will become apparent as I show a slideshow on this work. And tonight we're going to talk about the human rights situation in the Philippines and in Honduras. Honduras has got 1/10 the population of the Philippines, and it's about 1/10 the murder and mayhem as is happening in the Philippines. So they have very similar problems, third world countries. And the US, of course, is up to its eyeballs in intervention in both countries. So we'll cover both of these. And the story in Honduras has got a good ending to it. Namely, they've elected a decent president now. So I will cover that. So I will share the screen now. Let's see if this will work. And I'll now want to switch to a computer mode here. Let's see. Now, can you all see this slide?
Yes.
Can you see the
Yes.
slide? Okay.
Yes.
Well, our Group 37 started in 1976, so I was there, and we've been going now for 46 years on the Philippines. Did the slide advance?
Yes.
Okay. So it's the biggest chapter in Minnesota now, and we handle people from Minneapolis and St. Paul. Here's my email, g5king@msn.com. And anytime you want to find out what's going on or what actions are of our group, you go to twincitiesamnesty.org, and we have a lot of news and things there. Of course, Amnesty International is famous for trying to stop torture and to free prisoners of conscience. These are people who have not used or advocated violence, but who are really good people, and they should not be in jail. So we ask that they all be released immediately, and we adopt them and we work on their cases. So over the years, we've worked on all continents, maybe except Australia and Antarctica, and we've gotten many prisoners released. We've worked on over 30 cases. Once we adopt a prisoner, we work on them until they're free. So the longest was 9 years that we worked on. And sometimes these people get released and we get to meet them. And I'm very blessed to be able to go to Africa and to Vietnam and of course the Philippines and see these prisoners after their release, and that's very exciting. So my report tonight on the Philippines will touch on human rights violations. We're going to hit torture and disappearance, their current war against terrorism, and some techniques they're using, red tagging, extrajudicial killings, and massacres that the government, unfortunately, is heaping upon good people, environmental defenders, human rights activists. Now, I mostly visit the Visayas, which is the middle third of the Philippines, because my wife is from that little Long Island in the middle, Cebu, and we've been married 50 years. And then I often get over to Bohol and Negros, these other places, and some work in Mindanao as well. Going way back, the US first tried to conquer the Philippines after the Spanish were defeated in the Spanish-American War. And there was a long war in some islands. It went on to 1908. And the US sent 5,000 troops, and they conquered the Filipinos, who did not want to come under American control after 400 years of Spanish control. So the US was very pleased to use its vast firepower, use their artillery, use their Krag rifles, and they practiced by murdering Filipinos. And these are in this trench are the Santa Ana insurgents. Americans called them insurgents, which is wrong, because in fact they were patriots. They were in the Army of the Philippines. Their general was not chieftain Aguinaldo, he was President Aguinaldo. And the US had a very brutal war. Almost 1/6 of the population died, and then they came under American control for 50 years. There is a plaque in the rotunda of the Minnesota State Capitol, which you've really got to read. It talks about this war, and then it took a group of friends 8 years to get a corrective plaque put beneath it so that you can now see what really happened. For instance, in those days, the Americans got going with a thing called the water cure or waterboarding. Now, this is a picture from a postcard that these troops would send home to America to brag about their activities. And so the idea here is you capture a person, you want them to talk. So you pour water, it could be fresh, it could be salt, it could be toilet water. You pour it in their face until they succumb or they talk. Now, in this picture, you'll notice this is staged because this American officer is lightly holding the elbows of the victim. And at the victim's side is a sword, which would not happen under real waterboarding. But this was a practice that they picked up on how to get prisoners to talk. And wouldn't you know it, we have a president who picked up waterboarding and brags about it. He wrote a book after this stuff was exposed and done, and he brags that he would do it again for the same ill-gotten purposes, even though our Senate had a paper out saying it doesn't work, it doesn't do anything. Now, more recent history, Ferdinand Marcos was elected twice. So for 8 years, he was a lawful president of the Philippines. And at the end of that, he declared martial law, and he had martial law for 14 years. And by the way, when we lost our war in Vietnam, America doubled military aid to Marcos because we feared that somehow communism was going to overtake the Philippines next. And he was noted for all of the terror that he did, all the extortions of the rich people. At the end, he was flown by America to Hawaii. He lived out his days in Hawaii. And in Hawaii, the victims, the families of the victims of torture and murder, 6,000 families sued in a civil case, and a judge in Hawaii awarded those 6,000 families $2 billion. And they collected far less than 1% of that. He dies, his wife goes back to the Philippines, claims she doesn't know where the money is, and she was convicted of 22 felonies, but she never spent a day in jail, and she later got in Congress. She's still alive, Imelda Marcos, the lady with all the shoes. Amnesty did many reports over the years, and they describe a culture of impunity. So all these tortures and murders and things can happen. No justice, no court case, nothing fair. And then they even had trouble finding the line of command. In other words, victims are picked in the palace, but how do you show which general did it, who did it, etc.? No investigations. Now, this term extrajudicial killings means that a government murders people it doesn't like. This is killings for political reasons. In the Philippines, it's been carried out by the armed forces of the Philippines, by the police, the Philippine National Police, and by goon squads or paramilitary that are empowered by the authorities to track people, terrorize them, and kill them. So over the years, under Marcos, and I'm afraid under all the presidents since, there have been killing of political activists, labor leaders, lawyers, and journalists. And in the more recent 10 or so years, it's really more commonly done against environmental defenders and against indigenous peoples up in the mountain trying to live their lives as they would. And here's one of the problems. Even to this day, the government of the Philippines calls all opposition communist. And the military officers are trained to believe that good communists are dead communists, and you never trust Muslims, only dead Muslims are good Muslims. So 4% of their population is Muslim, and the military, mostly the army, gets to go after them quite a bit. So these murders and mayhem still continue, and this is still a country where you can say, if you're a communist, you're dead, even though the Communist Party is not illegal. So this is the first friend of mine who got murdered, is a Catholic priest, Father Rudy Romano. I met him in Cebu in 1980. He was heading the group called Task Force Detainees, a church group helping prisoners. I met him, my wife and I met him, we talked to him. And sure enough, in 1985, on my wedding anniversary, he gets kidnapped and he disappears. He's never been found, so he was killed. Now, there were witnesses who identified the army guys who took him. Under Cory Aquino, the next president, the good president, under Cory Aquino, a judge ruled that after one witness was murdered, ruled that there was no evidence, there's no body, therefore you cannot convict these people of kidnapping and murder. So that unfortunately sets the stage that you might as well kill people and dispose of them, and you're not going to have so many court cases. In 1983, Marcos killed his most famous victim, a man who would have probably beat him in an election. He was a senator, Benigno Aquino. He had been in prison for 7 years of martial law. He was released to come to America for heart surgery. And then when he decided he's going to go home and he wants Marcos to stop martial law, that's when they murdered him at the airport. And that changed everything. Now the rich people who kind of tolerated Marcos, now they realized that he could kill a very rich person and get away with it. So now they turned against Marcos too. Marcos did not have enough time to finish his Mount Rushmore to himself. And at the end, you may recall people power, people stood up, faced down tanks, and the Catholic Church got behind it too. And they wound up bailing him out, taking him to Hawaii to save his butt. He and his wife had plundered $5 to $10 billion, which was equal to half of the foreign debt of the Philippines at the time. Now, this is his son, Bongbong. They call him Bongbong. And he is soon running to be president again, or being another Marcos. And he claimed when he started running that they were stripped bare when they were taken to Hawaii. They had no money, they had nothing. When in fact, there were 2 C-5 transport planes full of loot, 22 crates of cash, 300 crates of assorted jewelry, 124 million worth of deposit slips to banks around the world. And it does not mention the numerous properties that he bought, especially in America. So the government's been trying to find this loot and they haven't had a lot of success. So this man claims they don't have any money, they never took it. He doesn't know why they're after him. Although today, the IRS of the Philippines has a pending case and they want somewhere between $500 million and $5 billion. They want that from him now. And he claims he has no problems. Kind of like Trump, I guess. Now, Cory Aquino got to be president and she seemed okay at first. She got a new constitution. She let 600 communists out of jail. And she seemed kind of Western. She gave a good speech to our Congress, got another $100 million. But in fact, eventually they turned on the activists, on the poor people, the unions. And her mode, not only using police and military, was to use paramilitary. So this is a sketch of goons with machetes who like to kill people. And the only difference between them and Marcos is that their T-shirts now show Cory Aquino instead of Marcos. So these goon squads have been going on to this very day, and there are dozens of them. And then, of course, when George Bush started invading Iraq, he wanted the coalition of the willing to help him do it. So he went there and he got then President Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo to send 2,000 troops to help us in our glorious fight against Iraq. So they became buddies. Later, she had to pull the troops because the Muslims, only in the Philippines, but in worldwide, were getting mad at the Philippines for sending troops to essentially mess up Muslim countries in the Middle East. So they pulled their troops out finally. Early on of our response to terrorism, they passed a bill, and it was very much like our U.S. National Defense Authorization Act. It blurs the distinction between ordinary crimes and terrorism. It might include legitimate and lawful dissent in the victims, warrantless arrests, detention without charges. This was a bad bill, and it's been in force since 2006. 3 years ago, they wrote another bill, and it doubled all of these. It doubled all the sins of all of these in a new anti-terrorism bill. So Amnesty's reports have found that their judicial system does not work. It is unfair. They only have judges. They don't have a jury trial. They found that confessions under torture are admitted into testimony, although many judges will say, well, I'm going to ignore it. And there's a weak writ of habeas corpus, so you can be arrested on God knows what reasons. And there's no witness protection. Normally, all these trials, especially for insurgency or insurrection, those trials last for years and they never complete. So here I am as a younger version with an attorney, Rex Fernandez, his mentor, El Surigao. I was going to meet on a trip, but a week before I got there, he was shot in front of his family and murdered. And in 2006, the Dutch lawyers visited and they reported that 24 human rights lawyers and judges were murdered in a 5-year period. So this was a very serious problem. In fact, it could be the military and police that killed them, but it could be a rich guy who does not like to have a trial or to not like to go to courts to solve his wealth. So it's very dangerous to be a lawyer and a judge. And here I am visiting 9 guys in jail. They were arrested at a wedding. Some of them, most of them didn't know each other before. One of them was heading tricycle drivers, which is a form of transportation. And he helped form a strike when the gas price went up, so he goes to jail. Others are in jeepney drivers, others are in other things. So we worked on their case and they did get released after 4 years. But guess what? This was the 3rd judge to get the trial. And he said, you've been in there longer than if we'd convicted you. I'll let you go now if you promise not to appeal a conviction for a felony. So they did that and they all got out of jail. And quite a few of them have children that wound up in my scholarship program. So there is uncertainty in the Philippines. In fact, they plant evidence all the time, even to this day. They'll find pillowcases in their houses with hand grenades in them. They will find explosives in their backpacks. They will find all kinds of drugs. They will find all kinds of things on people that they accuse of serious crimes, and then they get to lock them up. So here's the problem: is they get this Kafkaesque problem of being accused and framed and all this stuff with common crimes, and nothing is ever proven. So what happens if you go to jail for 2 to 6 years? The breadwinner goes to jail. The children will drop out of school. Public schools are free. You got to get there. It may cost 50 cents a day for rides to and from school. You got to buy your own books. You got to have sandals. So these kids drop out of school, and then by the time the parent gets out, they're so far behind, they very often will never go to school again. So this was pointed out to me by the church workers. And so we started in 1994. We started to help the children of the disappeared, the children of the political prisoners, the children of those killed. We helped them keep them in school. And it's called Philippine Scholars, and there's our website, philippinescholars.org. So we've been doing this for 27 years. We've worked out all the bugs. We give scholarships and we watch the students carefully, and we watch the grades and we encourage them. How do we do this? Well, we are 501c3, meaning tax deductible. One sponsor helps one student, one-on-one. Or if you're rich, I'll give you 3 students. You send $20 a month. All of that goes to the family, and it's used for direct school expenses. And then we expect the student to write the sponsor once a month. Nice letters. You get to know them. They get to know you. We're using email now, and we can expect that this will happen, and they will get to know the sponsor. So the sponsor will continue assistance often for a lot of years. Here's my wife, Glenn, visiting Cebu. At that time, we had 60 scholars, and here are the ones that are in college in Cebu at this photo. All of these kids, they look young because they used to start college at age 16. But we've had so many go through college, finish college, and really get going. The way to have a financial success in the Philippines is to get education. And they value it very, very, very highly. So if you want to know all about our program, you go to philippinescholars.org. All the information is there and you can get back in touch. Now, along the way, we've lost some parents of students. These three gentlemen were active with a group called Bayan Muna, which is a farmers organization. It teaches organic farming. It helps them hold on to their land against plantations and other things. It helps them maximize planting and harvesting. Really radical stuff, right? Well, these guys were threatened by the military with being killed. And the man under the green arrow, Victor Olivar, was a friend of mine. And after threats, Amnesty International did an urgent action. And we talked to the governor, we talked to the head of the military, we talked to the archbishop. And once he left this office building, he was murdered in 2006. Victor was killed. And here's his wife, Mary. Mary had recently delivered their 7th child. And now the two older boys were in our program, but they actually dropped out a while later. I guess they figured school wasn't their big problem. Maybe eating was more important. The girl, the red one that Mary has in her arms at this moment is in college studying pharmacy. She has a sponsor right now. And so Mary works as a manicurist. She works as a home Airbnb worker, a janitor, and she has raised these kids, and she's got my hat off to her. She's an amazing lady. If you want, I'll put you in email touch with her. So you got to stop the impunity, and it's going on, and it's not changed. Now, here's the recent stuff. President Rodrigo Duterte was elected in June 2016. So his 6-year term is over, and there's an election next month to replace him. He has learned to love his military. He has learned to embrace killings. When he was elected, he promised he would take his war on drugs to the whole country, and he would make sure that they murder what they call drug dealers, but in fact, it turned out to be any drug user. So they've killed a lot of people. So Amnesty wrote major reports on this, 50-page reports, all the suggestions of what they need to do to be under their own laws and international law. Amnesty reports are superb, and you can always trust them. So I'm now going to talk about 5 of the major problems today under Duterte. Most famous is the war on drugs. 27,000 people have been murdered. They only have 1/3 our population. So that's a lot of people. They're killed by the national police and by vigilantes. President Duterte brags, "I will not stop until the last drug pusher on the streets is fully exterminated." And he offers bounties for everybody they capture, and he doubles it if they can say that they had a gun. So you find these murdered people, you find them on the street with a gun by their side. This is a Canadian, Daniel Berhulak, who went there and took pictures of this war, and he got the 2017 Pulitzer Prize for breaking news. These pictures were posted in the New York Times. Here's a typical victim, a man. Bodies were found, their hands tied behind their backs, their heads wrapped in packing tape. They leave messages. One victim had a message said, "A pusher who won't stop will have his life ended." Curious thing about almost all victims, they have no shoes. They're from the poorest class. If you're poor, you're killed. This is what Amnesty notes. And you shoot them, and if they had shoes on, the shoes go flying, the slippers go flying, and they don't even have shoes. This is a picture he took in a cemetery. A lot of families are destitute. Families will actually put up a tent and they'll live in the cemetery. And who knows, when people bring food for their dead relatives, they may even get a little bit of food while living there. This is a morgue. The bodies are stacked up in the morgue. This is from the drug war, stacked like firewood. One guy here, age 36, was found dead under a bridge a week after his younger brother was also killed. Their mother scraped together enough loans and donations for $1,000 for this Aljon's funeral, but now she had to also bury her older son. They gave her a cut rate, only $240, and a one-day wake so that she could bury the older son too. So you got families broken, breadwinners gone, and all this problem. By the by, if you're a poor person and let's say you drive a taxi, you rent the taxi for 24 hours, which means the first 16 hours pay the rent and the gasoline, and you make your living on the money you earn in the last 8 hours. So they drive their taxi straight for 24 hours. How do you stay awake? Well, you've learned that you can take shabu, a form of methamphetamine. You can take shabu and it'll give you some energy to stay awake. So a lot of people aren't so much drug addicts, but they're doing this as part of their job. And then the military gets to kill them and claim they are drug users or pushers. In fact, if you're poor driving a taxi and you buy some shabu, you can sell half of it to the next cab driver, and that'll help pay for your own. So this is a problem. Now here is a very famous senator in the Philippines, Leila de Lima. She had been working for the human rights group. She was Secretary of Justice. She gets in the Senate. Duterte starts his drug war. So she brought into the Senate one of his assassins. He gave testimony for 3 days about how they had orders to go and find and kill drug users and street people in general. She did that. Duterte got mad. He charged her with dealing drugs, and she's been in jail now over 4 years. She has to try to do her Senate work from pieces of paper brought to her by her staff from her jail cell. I've had 2 letters back and forth with her. She's a really amazing person. So she is a prisoner of conscience, and Amnesty has adopted her. Our chapter has been working on her now for about 2 years, and she's still in jail. In fact, she is running to be reelected in 1 month, reelected. She's running from her prison cell. So she is a very honorable person, and we admire her. Second problem, counterinsurgency. There are a few people with guns who don't like the government. They date back to the Japanese in World War II. There are Muslims who've got armies who try to defend their lands. So there are some rebellion. There's some of it. Unfortunately, the military and police have learned it's a lot easier to shoot civilians than it is to shoot guys with actual guns. Under Duterte, more than 150 civilians have been shot dead, and hundreds of thousands of people have been chased from their homes in the villages. Often the army and paramilitary are enforcers for agribusiness and mining interests for foreign companies. They can be hired to go out and prevent any sort of protest. So here's a poor guy in 2020. The military came to him. He's a farmer. They said, "We want your brother. Where is he?" And either he did not take him to the brother or he didn't know where his brother was. So they killed him to tell the brother what's wrong. So this is common. Innocent people get murdered and no investigations. This was a friend of mine. She was the mother of a scholar of ours. Her son was in college. Karima was a poet and a journalist, a good writer, and she went to the countryside to document what's going on in the countryside. She got wounded in a shootout, and then the military murdered her. So the mother of this mother of a scholar got murdered last year, August 2021. The third problem is their war on human rights, environment, and land defenders. They like to target the leaders, could even be a labor union. So they've had more than 150 people murdered, leaders of groups, the most in Asia. And the Philippines has got a lot of minerals. It's a mountainous place, so does Honduras. I'll tell you that in a minute. Philippines has $1 to $2 trillion worth of minerals, and all the companies are anxious to get out there and grab those minerals. 80% of all the mining permits given to foreign companies are issued in the southern island of Mindanao, which is encircled in this map. And most of these places, the mountaintops, are where the tribal people live, the indigenous people. They're called Lumad. They live there. And so these mines come in and they want to take down the mountain. You don't dig in the hole. Don't dig a hole in the ground anymore. You take the mountain down and you sort it all out and leave a mess. So the problem is when resistance starts up, then the government gets going. They red tag people, which means they accuse them of being communists. So when the government doesn't like you, they call you a rebel, a communist, or a terrorist. There does not have to be any proof. They put up posters saying you are this and that you'd better stop or else. They red tag organizations. Here's about 17 organizations, all of them legal in the Philippines, all of them people's groups, in Gabriela, a woman's group. And yet they will still say that you're proscribed, you should not work, and we get to kill you when we want. So here's a foreign priest, Father Pops Tentorio from Italy, sided with the mountain people, gets murdered in the year 2011, and at his request, he was buried next to his other friend who was murdered, Father Tullio Favalli. Here's a murder in 2019, a woman, mother of 7 people. She was the leader of an indigenous group, Taltiguahanon, in Bukidnon, Mindanao. And because of that, they vilified her, red tagged her, and then they murdered her. Another group, the Tumandok, they wanted to flood their valley. They wanted to build a dam for the city, and this would flood their valley and they would lose their lands, their ancestral lands. So December 30th, 2020, 9 of them were murdered and 16 were arrested. They had been red tagged. Even a key witness of their murder was later killed, and a lawyer who tried to get some justice, he was attacked and badly injured. So it's very dangerous to defend these mountain people. And this is an American citizen, Brandon Lee from California. He was living in northern Luzon. His wife was from the Ifugao people, and he was a leader of an indigenous Ifugao peasant movement, the Peasant Movement for Justice and Peace advocates. He was shot 4 times in his house, became a quadriplegic, almost died, and they did get him back to California. So now he's still in California, and he's getting worse, I guess. And this is one of their killers, General Jovito Palperon. He bragged, he said on a radio show, he said, if we kidnap you and anybody protests, we kill you because then we know you're a communist. They also call him a verdugo. That's a word for executioner. Here are pictures of 2 co-eds, Karen and Sherilyn. They were kidnapped. They were held in a military camp for 2 years. Other inmates saw them being sexually abused, and then they finally disappeared. And they've not been seen since. And here's another friend of mine, Elisa Badayos. Actually, our program started with her because in 1990, her husband, working for a labor union, disappeared. One of her sons went to join the rebels. The military found where he was and executed him in 2007. And the mother, so 4 of her children were actually in our program. Her son killed. He was a scholar in our program for a while. At any rate, she works for the group called Carapatan to investigate. She went to Negros, the island next door, and she investigated the abuse of farmers. And then guys come up on the motorcycle and shot her to death. And that's a common way of executing in the Philippines. So the mother of the first 4 scholars, she got murdered finally. At the time of her murder, 7 of her grandchildren were in our program. You can see why I get mad about this. A year later, a bishop from Negros came to Cebu and gave a talk about all these killings. He pointed out this banner, 14 people killed one weekend in Negros. They're farmers. And if you look at the ones on the right, the 3 coffins on the right, the guy in the middle there, Franklin Lariosa, I met him at a lawyer's office. He had come to be a witness to the guys that killed Eloise Badallos. So he gets murdered. And then I met Father Rusticotan twice. Actually, his son went through college on our program. He was in and out of jail, siding with the farmers. He was lately, he was teaching organic farming. He was approaching me to find a scholarship or find a grant to teach farmers organic farming. And so he was killed last year, murdered in his home. Rusticotan, very good guy. And here's a doctor and her husband were killed. She was the head of the COVID-19 Interagency Task Force on Emerging Infectious Diseases. If you treat people indiscriminately, the military says you're helping communists. We get to kill you. So she was red tagged, and then finally they murdered her. And here's a woman who was a whistleblower in that prior massacre of 9 people. She said that police planted firearms and bullets against the people they murdered. And so she gets murdered a little over a year ago. And this woman, also at the same time, campaigner of one of the parties, Anakpawis, shot inside her home. So it's dangerous to work human rights, work for the environment in the Philippines. Philippines is the most dangerous country for journalists in Southeast Asia. 42 journalists have been assassinated since 2007. No convictions. And this woman is very famous, and she's been red tagged and she's endangered, let's put it that way. Her name is Maria Ressa. She's the editor of an online paper called Rappler. She's been charged with over a dozen crimes by the Duterte government. Time made her Person of the Year. Last year, she shared the Nobel Peace Prize for her brave work to save democracy in the Philippines. Fortunately, her charges are bailable, so she's been able to make bail and she's still out, but it's not clear if she'll outlive Duterte. And finally, it's the most dangerous country in Southeast Asia for lawyers, 64 murdered under Duterte. Here's a guy who was, he was simply trying to help many of the murders in Negros. He was trying to help them, and he was shot dead. His wife was wounded. And then back to Rex Fernandez, my lawyer friend. He's been my good friend for 30 years and worked a lot with him. I've witnessed his court cases. And so Rex was, here's a picture. He's in Minneapolis. He traveled around Minneapolis. He gave us talk about human rights in the Philippines. And 3 months ago, he was protesting in his condominium. He was protesting the rising of rates. So he was leading a nonviolent kind of a sit-in protest. And he posted that there's people that want me dead. And so right after the post, he was shot and murdered. So this is under Duterte, the current president. This isn't even his whole 6 years. This is just 4 years. 457,000 people had to evacuate their villages. because of the military and paramilitary. 376 extrajudicial killings, 488 attempts to kill, 2,600 illegal arrests without detention, 1,000 illegal arrests with detention, 8,500 indiscriminate shootings by the security forces, and 46,000 times they used churches and schools in the villages for military purposes and to hide from anybody who might be mad at them. So they have an election in 1 month, and here are the cast of characters, the main people running. Let's just go across. Panfilo Lacson, he's the one who arrested and tortured the 9 guys that I helped get out of jail 20 years ago. He made it up to Congress. He made it up to be a senator. He started off as a murderer for the Philippine intelligence. Moreno is an actor without any experience in government. Then there's Bongbong Marcos. He had no job before running for presidency. And then there's Manny Pacquiao. He's a famous boxer. He's got the record of the most missed votes in Congress. And then the good one, Leni Robredo, is current vice president. Duterte hates her. And she is running now to be president. I wish I could say she was leading the pack. She might not be. In 1 month, votes are cast, and it could be another Marcos who might beat her in the election. So things are dangerous right now in the Philippines. And the situation has not changed. Under Duterte, it's kind of gotten as bad as ever. And the Philippines is going to vote now. So, as Gandhi said, you must make injustice visible. I would now like, with no objections, I would like to talk a bit about Honduras. And again, if you want to talk to me, I can send you infinite reports, g5king@msn.com. So just a quick report on Honduras. I've been there twice recently, and the most recent one was just last July. And the trip was called Vamos a la Milpa. That means let's go to the Milpa. What is Milpa? Central Americans learned long before Columbus that you could plant many crops on the same plot of land. And if you plot corn, squash, and beans, you have almost a complete diet. So they now have to relearn this because many farmers recently started planting monoculture, started planting export crops, working on plantations. And now when they lose their land, they lose things. Now they got to go back and relearn how to plant milpa. An agronomist called this one of the most successful human inventions ever created. So there is Honduras, smack in the middle of Central America, mostly bordering on the Caribbean. This is my daughter, Gayla King. She lives in Oakland. She and I went on a mission almost 3 years ago. And we were there especially to look at the Guapano River, which was being polluted by a mine. So we went there with 73 other people. These are called faith leaders. Most of them are priests, nuns, a couple of rabbis, people that most of them were fluent in Spanish. I was not. But we went there for 10 days and we visited with 20 groups of people. The question was, why are they migrating? Why are they coming to America? And we went everywhere and we talked to people, even the US ambassador, about this. Pope Francis has called out the problem. Pope Francis in Rome has said, you've got to respect the migrants and the refugees. Please do this. So Honduras is a very mountainous place. They have very few highways, very mountainous, just like the Philippines, actually. They've only got 9 million people, and almost 1 million of them are either in America or trying to come. So people are fleeing this country because their opportunities have gone to nothing. We flew in and out of San Pedro Sula in the north, but we also took a bus down to Tegucigalpa, and we traveled east to the eastern part. If you take a look at the countryside, it looks just like the Philippines. You can see some flat areas which can grow crops and fruit and things, and then you see the mountains, which pretty much aren't being farmed. And you go to the villages, or go anywhere, cities, villages, here are all the beautiful things they grow. It's a very rich country. They can grow these things like crazy. So we were hosted by Radio Progreso, which is the third most popular radio show there. And the government hates it because it reports all the truth, all the things happening. Here they built a little mandala on the floor made out of seeds and some fruits to welcome us to Honduras and to share with us their stories. The man who takes us, his name is Jose Artiga, and I can put you in touch with him if you like. He has, excuse me, he's brought over 10,000 people to Honduras, El Salvador. He's brought them there on visiting exposure trips. He hasn't lost one of them. And we went in the middle of the COVID last July. Nobody caught COVID, and it was all great, very safe. He runs an organization called SHARE. Now, this is my granddaughter, Maya King. She went with me last July. She's studying medicine and Spanish at the University of Minnesota, so she was happy to go with me. And again, Radio Progreso welcomes us, sets up programs, and here you can see they've shown the whole thing, Bienvenido. They've shown the whole thing of their fruits and vegetables here that are common for the country. This trip only had 25 people. One of the things we were keenly interested was Berta Cáceres. She was an indigenous person trying to help indigenous people hold on to their land in the face of mining corporations and plantations. And so she was murdered 5 years ago, shot. And she's a famous person. She's sacrificed. The people are very, very proud of her and trying to live up to her ideas. And these are Spanish in Spanish, but there's all kinds of words here about passion, valor, bravery, what you got to do. So here we travel around the country, and we traveled a lot in that little yellow bus that sat the 25 of us. So you go there and you stop, and we started hiking up this hillside. And about an hour's climb, we get up the hill. And when you're at the top of the hill, you look out. You may see some of these cows that some relatively richer person has, but in the distance is flat land, beautiful farmland. And you would think that many people could be there, but they had 2 typhoons, 2 hurricanes one year, and that whole bottom area got flooded. And 1 million people lost their farms and their homes. And they fled up to this hilltop. They can see their former land, but they're up on the hilltop trying to scratch out a living. So here they brought their families up. They live in little huts, and they try to plant crops. Once in a while, the police show up and cut down the crops for them. But it's dangerous, but they have no choice. And their children can go to school, and they can walk down the hillside. Here's the leaders of these people, gives us speeches. And again, they're translated into English, and they tell us some of their stories. And there's the children. And like kids anywhere, they're beautiful. And in fact, these kids look just like Filipinos. They are wonderful kids, and they're maybe don't realize everything happening to the family, but there they are on the hilltop, trying to grow crops. So we also went to this radio station. This one is in danger of being shut down by the government. And we went there to meet people who are Garifuna. Garifuna are the people living along the Caribbean coast who are the descendants of escaped slaves, escaped African slaves. And they do fishing and grow some crops on the coast side. The problem is rich people want to build billion-dollar resorts, another Cancun. So they want to expel these people from their ancestral lands. So their leaders came up and spoke to us about what they're up against, the violence, how they resist, and what's going on. Again, this could be U.S. corporations bankrolling these resorts, by the way. Cesar Benedeth is an endangered guy because 3 years ago, the top 5 leaders of this group disappeared. They were picked up by security forces and never seen. Amnesty did 2 urgent actions about it. We still are demanding that they be produced. But I think we all know they are dead. And here's Jenny Herrera, president of a similar group, and they came to tell us their story. This is dangerous. This is dangerous because they're now standing up like they might be the leaders for the Garifuna. So now they can be targeted. So they told us their story and shared with us. And here, Maya and I are talking to Jenny, and I'm trying to have Maya translate to her to understand what Amnesty International can do. I didn't know at that moment that they had already done actions on the Garifuna disappearances, but we're taking their story seriously and we're taking back names and things. Produce the disappeared. And the whole group got to go to an experimental farming center for a day. Here's our 25, and we do a little bit of the work that the Milpa inspires. So we do some planting of some of the beautiful vegetables they can grow. We do a little work to make compost heaps, and they're teaching this to the farmers, reteaching it, because they may be exiled to the mountaintops and they may be trying to do this again. And of course, Honduras is a beautiful tropical place. This is called a fire tree, beautiful place. Now here's a river, Guapanol River. I call this a creek because it's this big, it's tiny. And it's the source of water for 5 villages. You'll see in the distance, there's a white polyethylene pipe, and that gets the water from a little bit upstream, brings it down to the villages. This is their drinkable water. So we go there with local people, we say some prayers, we do some vigils, and then the military shows up on the other bank. A dozen military show up with body armor, automatic weapons, face masks. They show up. Why? Because that land where they're standing has been leased by a foreign corporation. And they don't want you to set 1 foot on that opposite shore. They're prepared to take action. So here's a close-up picture of what they look like. They're Hondurans. The poor kids are paid to join the military and become thugs. And as we're there, here they're taking pictures of us. This showed up the next day in a social media place. And what they do is they point out not the North Americans who are visiting, they point out the local Salvadoran or Honduran people who are there, and they identify them by name, and they say things to the effect that these are communists and these are troublemakers. So it turned out that 8 guys were arrested, not in this incident, but actually a little bit before, and they were in jail. So these are called the Guapanol 8 water defenders. Now our trip was there in last July, and actually the pictures of the Army were from my previous trip, but these guys were arrested in 2019. And at this trip in July, we got to meet their families. There's the wife of one, the 3 children of one. And that guy is Jose Abelino Cedillo. He's one of the 8. And here's another one, his brother, Porfirio Sorto Cedillo. So these guys have been in jail. And so we had a chance to meet the families and the community. And then we got on a bus and we went to the prison, Olanchito prison. And we were able to talk our way in. So we're all there, we got masks, and we just want to talk. And finally the warden lets us in. So the prisoners come out and we got to sit for 2 hours and talk to them. And here I'm talking to this guy, I'm trying to help him understand Amnesty International wants to help him get released. And guess what? He knows the streets in Minneapolis. His wife is in Minneapolis right now. So, small world. So this is the problem. This is why the people are fleeing. The US, since the 1930s and before, has been heavily involved in Honduras, giving them weapons. The government is from the elite. There's 12 families. They own everything. They run the government, 12 families. In the Philippines, it's 100 families, does the same thing. In America, 400 families. The military and police got all these weapons. They use them. Then the transnational corporations are there and the banks, and they have an extractive economic model. Give us your coffee, give us your bananas, give us your minerals, and all this stuff is working. And on the people, they get unlimited violence, inequality, impunity, and corruption. And there's organized crime now in the big cities. There's a war on the poor, forced displacement, human rights abuse. So we learned about these problems, and these are forcing Hondurans, if they want to eat, they're forcing them to run to come to America. So as we left, there was a ceremony, and in the bottom you can see they've laid out their vegetables and fruits. This is the wealth from the land. Here's a guy, the priest doing this is Father Mello. He has got so many death threats against him. And at the bottom, you see a little sign, Fuera J-O-H. Everywhere we went, we saw this sign. It means flee, J-O-H. J-O-H is the initials of their president. Everywhere we went, we saw that he should leave the country. So I want to leave you with some really good news. An election happened in January. Xiomara Castro, the wife of the guy who was overthrown in 2009, where the Obama administration and Hillary Clinton didn't say one word about it. His wife is now the president of Honduras. And she is saying good things. She speaks strongly about human rights. She said open pit mining must stop. And she said the water defenders of Guapanol should not be imprisoned or killed. On her inauguration, he was visited by Kamala Harris. And a few days after this, the Guapanol 8 water defenders were released back to their families. And at the same time, the president, J-O-H, was arrested. Juan Orlando Hernandez was arrested, and I can tell you yesterday, he was flown to America to stand trial and possibly wind up where his brother is under life imprisonment in a US prison for turning Honduras into a narco state. It is bringing in all the narcotics from Colombia and Venezuela. They go to Honduras to come to America. So he actually not only left office, but he actually today is in America, and he's going to have a trial. So April 19th, 2 days ago, the US government released a report on the strategy for addressing the root causes of migration. You can go there, you can download it. It's a long report. They brag that $1.2 billion in private sector money is going to Central America to give new jobs and opportunities. We want to stop the migration, right? They have 6 focus areas to support long-term. These are promoting a reform agenda, digital and financial inclusion, food security and climate-smart agriculture, climate adaptation and clean energy, education and workforce development, public health access. In general, it sounds kind of progressive. But when you get into the details, you wonder. Microsoft wants to help 4 million Hondurans get internet access. They want to support farmers so they can grow coffee and we can buy coffee. They want to help them with price premiums, technical assistance. Our banks want to give them all MasterCards. They want to enable small businesses. They want especially to buy yarn for cotton in things made in America. If you can imagine, all our clothes come from Far East, right? They want to encourage them to help grate cotton and make yarn for our factories. They want solar power, net zero emissions. They want to give loans to everybody. PepsiCo wants to improve its infrastructure and investments. They want to replenish watersheds, sounds good. Telemedicine, a center for gender equity, gender-based lens on technical assistance. This sounds like things you might see in America. They want to increase the jobs in sales for all those unskilled people. They want public and private partnerships. They want vaccines and finances, and they want to professionalize the security forces. That sounds a little bit ominous considering what they've been doing. So I leave you with this question. Will any of this aid help? Or will it just treat them to some more capitalism so that the 12 families that run the country can now do better to run it for the benefit of America? Okay, that is my slideshow. And now maybe Katya can help do some questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Gary. It was so great to hear everything that you had to tell. We do have some questions. So the first question comes from Gail, and she's asking, what are the countries, the more dangerous countries for journalists and lawyers? So if you want, I can take that one.
Are you saying that they're endangered because of culture? Or that?
Gail?
You said that the Philippines is the most dangerous in Southeast Asia, but I'm thinking, well, it sounds like it could be in the entire world from what you were describing. So I'm wondering what other countries are worse.
I can't actually answer that one, but let me put it this way. The Philippines is good for having newspapers that tell the stories. The journalists, of course, they're underpaid, but they can become a journalist and they can go out and investigate and they can start telling stories. Now, when you investigate a rich person or a multinational corporation and you start to report what's going down, that's very dangerous. That is very, very dangerous. Or if you're a lawyer and you try to bring a lawsuit against a wealthy person, as my friend Rex Fernandez tried to do 4 months ago. If you do that, you're basically putting a bullseye on your chest. And when you get killed, there'll be no justice. There's no investigation. Here's a funny thing. In the Philippines, if you get murdered, the government, the police don't take over. They don't gather evidence. They don't arrest suspects. They don't work up a case. They don't plan for a prosecution. Your family has to pay for all that. And the average trial in the Philippines can easily last for 2 to 4 years. Average. For instance, there's a hearing one day and the attorney of the prosecutor doesn't come. The judge says, okay, see you next month. I mean, they don't have a jury trial, it's just a judge. And to extend these things out indefinitely happens all the time. And so at any rate, the judicial system is really wacky, and that encourages murders. Plus the actual sophisticated way to kill is 2 guys come up on a motorbike and one of them shoots you and then they drive off. There are even, in Rex's case, he's in Cebu, my wife's town. I've been there many, many times. There are cameras on the businesses looking at the street, lots of cameras. So Rex's car pulled up. He waits for the traffic. And a guy's been looking for him, runs out of a drugstore, comes up alongside and shoots him 4 times in the head. The guy runs back, points the gun at the next car as if, don't you bother me. Then he runs a little bit up the street, hops on a motorbike behind a guy, and they take off. Very common assassination in the Philippines all the time. And there is nobody going to stop it. There's nobody that's going to get arrested, no justice. So that is the standard operating procedure, I'm afraid. So if you report on sins, or in the case of Leila de Lima, if you report on the government assassinations of drug users, they'll throw false charges, they'll throw you in prison, and you'll sit there until they decide to change the president. So it's incredibly dangerous, but people are incredibly brave. Maria Ressa, if you can hear her speak about freedom of the press, that is a very good lecture. She really tells it like it is and ought to be.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I would like to give you some statistics just to respond, to complete the response to Gail. According to Reporter Without Borders, the worst country in the world for journalists is Mexico, and it's followed closely by Afghanistan, and then India, and then China, Bangladesh, Azerbaijan, Yemen, Palestinian territories, and Burkina Faso. Also, the UNESCO recently released, in 2020, released a report saying that 62 journalists were killed in connection with the job that they were doing in 2020. And also the Reporters Without Borders recently released a report saying that 39 journalists and media assistants were killed in direct connection with the work they were doing. So it's not only one country. I think we have many cases in many countries. We talk about the most dangerous, and sometimes we think of specific countries that our own biases take us. But I think these events that CGS Minnesota hosts has a goal to make us think and to fight, and to really make sure that we read and listen to different sources, because sometimes we are also taken to one or two sources, but we needed to make sure that we double check our information. And just as a reminder, not long ago, a few months ago, just go to our CGS website in the past events tab, and you're gonna see event we hosted about the disappearances in Mexico, about people who disappear. And usually it's because of multiple things, but including journalists. So it's a very interesting piece of information. If anybody is interested, it's for free and it's available for everybody. But we all know about the multiple cases of journalists and publishers that are constantly persecuted, killed everywhere in the world. And unfortunately, we are not, I don't think there is a country that doesn't commit their own wrongdoings. So I would like to keep that, everybody keeps that in mind. Just today, and CGS Minnesota has co-hosted or hosted events about, for example, Julian Assange, who is an Australian journalist who has been kept in Belmarsh prison and in United Kingdom, and he has been under prison because the United States requested his extradition. So this decision is still pending decision now from the Secretary of State of United Kingdom. And the reason he is in prison is because he's the founder of WikiLeaks, and he released information to the public about war crimes committed about our country. So there are things that we needed to know and we should know. And the journalists are the people and the professionals who actually keep us on our feet and give the information to us. I always repeat that there is no democracy without journalists. So that's why we are concerned about them. Also, so thank you, Gail, for your question. Also, Gail had another question here. Do the people understand the red tagging and other techniques used, or do they believe the government when it says someone's a communist or something?
That is a very pregnant question. Duterte is very popular. Probably 80% of the voters like him. Obviously, that's the 80% who aren't being killed with the drug war, or are not Lumad people in the mountains, or the Muslim people in the South. But in theory, he could be reelected on his current record. And he, oh golly, he's just like Trump. He's got so many women. He's got children by different women. He's disrespectful of anything you could hope for. But the people kind of say, well, he's a man of action. He's an actor, really. And so that's the problem, is that the people kind of know there's red tagging. It kind of gets in the newspapers. But many of the people would say, well, it's somebody else that's in trouble. It's a communist. It's a insurgent. It's a Muslim. So many people would say, I don't fear things. I'm okay, and the police doesn't do this against me. On the other hand, I know many people, middle-class people, who know someone who was killed in the drug war. So actually, and if you bother to go up into the mountains, you will meet the Lumad, and you can talk to all kinds of people that have been abused. So, you know, if you're just getting by and you're living in the city and you want your kids to do their best in school and all that, you could probably say it's not my problem. And so that's the problem, that he is not paying a political price for these sins. And also the whole concept of laws, you know, the average person there doesn't expect justice in the court on anything. So if you say a lawyer got killed or a judge got killed, the average person is like, well, I couldn't possibly use a lawyer or a judge. They would never do anything good for me. So it's really a kind of a pretty low expectations, I guess you could say. And it's a lot like a lot of Americans that can imagine voting for Trump again. You know, I can't imagine it, but there are plenty that do. So I would say neither society has got an edge up on being thoughtful and being caring about things. And then, of course, you could even fault their religious, or not religious, their school system, because it doesn't, well, ours too. Now they're being challenged to not talk about civil rights and not talk about human rights, not talk about gay rights or whatever. So we both have this problem that, the rights of people are not being championed. And if they aren't championed by the top level of government, the people often don't think of it themselves. So we got a lot in common with that thing where imagine that people could vote for Trump a second time.
Gary, in your opinion, there's a question from Dick. Was Duterte fairly elected in a reasonably legal election? In your point of view,
He
is
was.
the election is fair and square?
Yeah, he was legally elected. Now, in their system, he got 34% of the vote. And he was the highest in a field of 5 or 8 people. So the highest is the president. The second highest is vice president, which was Leni Roboto, this woman who's pretty decent. She probably got 25% of the vote, but she turned out second, and then he can ignore her his entire presidency. And she's from a different party, actually. So it's a funny system that way. And in this current election, it may work out the same way. Bong Bong may get 35%, Lenny may get 25%, and others get less. So it could be the same deal that Bong Bong would get in there. I would say it's about a 70% chance he'll be elected president.
Bong Bong?
Yeah, Bong Bong Marcos, the son of Ferdinand.
So do you think people just will vote because they don't know what his father has done? Or
there's a whole bunch of things. One is that the northern Philippines is the Ilocos and other areas. Marcos came from there. So there's a lot of tendency to vote for somebody from your district. So right there, he may get 25% of the vote just from the northern part of the country. People may vote for him. There's a lot of I would call miseducation. So, for example, under Marcos, 6,000 families suffered and 20,000 died. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people are saying, "Oh, the trains ran on time under Marcos," or under Marcos, the exchange rate was 6-1, pesos to $1. Now it's 50-1. Therefore, let's go back to Marcos. So there's a lot of people that are saying history doesn't matter, and all this murder and mayhem, any president does it, and unfortunately, a lot of presidents have done that. So you could say that things aren't going to get any worse, and you might as well elect the guy who was there when the economic times were better. So that can be a part of it too.
Okay, so this is going to be the last question, if you can do it quickly. So it's Gail again. Didn't the U.S. overthrow Zelaya, president of Honduras? I assume the U.S. is supporting Duterte in favor of the U.S. corporations' efforts to displace the Garifuna, etc.
Well, in the case of Honduras, the U.S. government didn't say anything. They're like, "Oh, we're not going to interfere. This is democracy." Their secret reports probably said she stands a great chance of winning, but they didn't come out in favor of her. Since her election, Anthony Blinken made a speech saying, "Okay, they've elected a new president," and he didn't indicate any problem with it. Then Kamala Harris went there for the inauguration. And now they've come up with this very large program to prevent migration. And you may recall, even Biden said, well, in the State of the Union, he says, we're going to help them get their economies going and people don't need to migrate. So they've come up with all this stuff, and Honduras is one of the countries. In fact, I think the most immigrants at the border are from Honduras now. It's a great country to try their experiment on to see if they can hedge the immigration a lot. And so they're really making it a showcase. And now they're very happy to have her there because she doesn't have a reputation of being corrupt. But they're not saying the 12 families are naughty, and they're not saying that their version of capitalism on the people. And in fact, if you've ever read Naomi Klein, they're having a thing called disaster capitalism, where the capitalists love chaos, they love natural disasters, and then they step in and they get their investments and they get things cheap. Well, the 12 families have not really been mentioned by the US, and we're certainly not about to go after them. And my fear is that all the money that we think we can throw at the problem, it'll have to go through governments or the families or industry. That money is not going to go into the poor people's pocket. In fact, could be very little of it will, and the people will still keep coming. So I don't know that their strategy is going to work. And of course, they would say it's going to take 10 years. Well, I don't know that that's going to stem the migration for 10 years. So, we're not disavowing capitalism in any sense. In fact, we're hoping that US companies will bankroll a lot of this goodness. And of course, they're going to bankroll it in ways that benefit them. So we could not get our government to possibly approve a broad program that would really help the poor, other than the vaccines, which we may do, but we're not going to get our government to say, oh, we really want to help the poor in Honduras, when they don't even want to help the poor in America.
Yeah, that's true. Gary, thank you so very much. It's sad to have to say goodbye and end this meeting. It's been such a great moment for, I think, all of us. On behalf of CGS Minnesota, I want to also thank you all for attending this event. If you want to watch again, the recording can be found on our website and on our YouTube channel, along with the resources to help. CGS Minnesota hosts events every month. Please visit our website to learn what the next event are. You also can, if you want to make a difference, you want to know how you can assist, or if you want to receive our emails, contact us as www.globalsolutionsmn.org, or send an email to cgsmn.contact@gmail.com. Thank you, Gary King, for accepting our invitation and for sharing with us the facts and the situations of the Philippines and Honduras. It's been a pleasure to listen and learn from you. Thank you again, Gary, so very much for, we appreciate you so much. I want to honor everybody that came for 1 hour conversation, and we went way much more than that. Gary, thank you so very much for that. I appreciate you very much.
You're very, very welcome.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
Pleasure.